right? Scottie Pippen rings, those 6, they're not the same as Michael Jordan's.
I think Scotty's rings are just the same as Michael Jordan's. Why not?
Because he won the best player on the team.
Yeah, but he was the most impactful player on the team.
I get it.
That he is on course to break the all-time scoring record, average record of an NBA Finals, which is held right now by Rick Barry.
When it comes to the media cycle in the NBA podcast world, one name that constantly gets brought up is Michael Jordan. Looking at Jordan's legacy and what he built throughout the 90s, even today it still feels almost untouchable. For Jordan fans, it's a badge of honor, something they proudly stand on. But for the anti-Jordan crowd, that's exactly what they can't stand. So what do they end up doing? Over and over again, they try to tear Michael Jordan down by twisting facts or rewriting parts of history. A clear example of this comes from people like Rich Paul, Max Kellerman, and Gilbert Arenas.
Yeah, so ring culture is not real. It was never real. When you go back into the 80s and 90s, right? There was no ring culture.
He won that championship. I was pissed. I want him one.
But even after he had won one the next year, his obsession only grew deeper.
For Michael Jordan, it's almost apocalyptic. After all, the only thing this guy can't buy is a trip to the NBA Finals.
There was no ring culture.
So let me stop that right there for a second. We're 11 seconds in and we already have a flawed point and a straight-up false claim being pushed. The idea that ring culture or winning culture started with Michael Jordan is simply not accurate. That mindset has existed long before Jordan ever entered the league. You can go all the way back to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s and see it clearly. In sports, greatness has always been measured not just by talent or skill, but by impact and championships as well. Look at Bill Russell versus Wilt Chamberlain. That rivalry alone proves it. What was it really built on? Ring culture versus statistical dominance and individual greatness. Someone like Jerry West is another example. What defined parts of his legacy was exactly that same conversation around winning and championships, especially his losses to the Boston Celtics. Now, look at Michael Jordan before 1991. At that point, yes, he was already a transcendent elite-level talent, but what was the biggest criticism against him? It was that he wasn't Magic, Kareem, or Bird, and more importantly, he hadn't won yet. And that was the whole point people made about Jordan at the time. Of course, he was incredible, but the standard back then was always clear. You had to win to be considered truly great.
It changed from player to player. Magic Johnson, obviously, because of his notoriety, and Larry Bird, his notoriety, that we had to get past them, or I had to get past them individually before I gain any credibility or can ever get into their ballpark. I had to win championships.
There was no ring culture.
I had to win MVPs. I had to make impacts on my team. So that became a challenge for
One thing we keep seeing again and again around this so-called ring culture debate is that those who dismiss winning usually haven't experienced it at the same level as their peers or rivals and tend to feel slighted because of that. Take someone like Gilbert Arenas, for example. He was never really a championship guy, so in his view, rings don't define greatness and don't carry the same weight. Then you look at someone like McGrady. When he's comparing himself to Kobe, he often minimizes championships and the true value of that Larry O'Brien trophy. Time after time, the pattern stays the same. The voices most critical of rings are usually the ones who never got one. At the end of the day, in sports, the whole mission is winning, and trying to downplay that core truth honestly makes you sound like a loser. There are plenty of players in league history who could fill up stat sheets, drop big numbers, and still not prioritize winning, but the ones we actually remember are the winners, the ones who may have sacrificed individual stats to reach the ultimate goal of winning a championship and lifting the Larry O'Brien trophy.
Right, Scottie Pippen rings, those 6, they're not the same as Michael Jordan's.
Right.
They're not the same as LeBron James.
But they're pretty good.
But they're good. They're good. If there's some sidekick rings, if there's some sidekick rings,
I think Scotty's rings are just the same as Michael Jordan's. Why not?
Because he won the best player on the team.
Yeah, but he was the most impactful player on the team.
I get it.
Now, stopping that right there for a second. As the old saying goes, when someone is making a mistake, sometimes you just let it play out. Right here, Rich Paul is basically exposing himself as someone who completely misunderstands basketball, and it's coming off as straight-up nonsense. He's pushing this idea that Scottie Pippen, the Bulls' MVP-level presence, is being reframed through what many see as an agenda-driven narrative tied to tearing down Jordan and even indirectly revising LeBron's era. And let's be real, from the Rich Paul Clutch Sports circle, the accusation being thrown around is that there's an effort to twist history and reshape the story entirely. People even joke that give it 10 or 15 years, and suddenly you'll hear wild claims like Pippen dropping 41 in '93 or taking over Game 6 against Utah instead of Jordan. Now, to actually break down that claim and clear the air, Jordan was clearly the driving force and most valuable player on those Bulls teams when you look at the numbers and performance. Across that 1999 postseason reference and overall Bulls playoff runs, Jordan consistently outscored Pippen by huge margins, often averaging around 14 more points per game. He was a multiple-time scoring champion, one of the most dominant playoff scorers of the entire 1990s era. And compared to Pippen, he was better from the field, from deep, at the line, and just about every scoring metric you can think of. Bottom line, Michael Jordan wasn't just a scorer, he was the most lethal postseason weapon the game has ever seen, finishing games, hitting mid-range shots, knocking down free throws, and taking over as the primary closer when it mattered most.
Great thing about Michael is that he can get shots off in this game. As many coaches will tell you, it's so tough to get shots for players, and when you've got a player that can get shots on his own like Michael can to win games for you, it's a real luxury.
And even when you zoom out and look at MJ's scoring burden, it stands out like nothing else in NBA history. We're talking about arguably the heaviest offensive load any all-time great has ever carried. Just look at the finals MVP scoring gaps over the years, and the numbers tell a pretty clear story. Shaq in 2000 had the biggest margin, sitting at a plus 22.4 over Kobe. Then you've got Wade in 2006 at plus 20.9, Jordan in 1993 at plus 19.8, Rick Barry at plus 18, and Jordan again with plus 17.8 and plus 15.0. That right there shows the kind of separation we're talking about when the finals MVP is clearly the primary engine of a team. And for Jordan's Bulls, that secondary scoring role belonged to Scottie Pippen, who was nowhere near him in terms of offensive output.
If you unplug Scottie Pippen off that team,
Sure.
Jordan's 0 for 6.
Now, for someone like Jordan, 25 or even 35 years later, calling him just a great scorer completely ignores everything else he brought to the basketball floor. Then you've got takes like Rich Paul reducing Jordan to a stat line like 32 points, 1 assist, and 1 rebound, as if that's all he contributed. But when you actually look at prime Jordan, and even that 1999 era comparison point, the numbers outside scoring are nearly identical in many areas. Correct. So think about it like this. The anti-Jordan crowd tries to frame him as nothing more than a one-dimensional scorer. Meanwhile, they elevate Scottie Pippen as the true all-around piece who supposedly did everything else at a higher level, but the stats don't really back that up. Yes, Jordan's scoring was massive and carried Chicago offensively, but as an all-around player, he was still competitive with Pippen in almost every category except rebounding. And if you're not completely ignoring context, you'd understand that a slight edge in rebounds or steals does not outweigh a 14-point scoring gap per game. Well, duh. Because saying Scottie Pippen was the true MVP of those Bulls teams is like claiming Pau Gasol was the real engine next to Kobe, or that Dwayne Wade was just a side piece next to LeBron in 2010. At that point, you're not analyzing basketball, you're just forcing a contrarian take for attention. And when it comes to Jordan's help narrative, people forget Pippen entered the league as an unpolished project, not a finished superstar. By 91 and 92, he had developed into an all-star, but the reality is Jordan's supporting cast in the 90s mostly came down to him and Pippen as the only consistent All-NBA level presence. Now, if you want to argue Jordan had too much help, that's fine, but then you also have to apply that same lens to LeBron's era from 2010 onward through 2026, because LeBron at every stop has played alongside multiple All-Stars, superstars, and Hall of Fame level talent. And if you think Jordan was the one surrounded by stacked super teams, you're going to be very surprised when you compare it directly to LeBron's supporting casts. Now, one more thing on Jordan versus Pippen value is the on-off metric data from 1990 to 1998, which spans a solid sample of 59 tracked games. The numbers show Jordan and Pippen together produced a plus 13.7 net rating, which is strong. When Jordan played without Pippen, the Bulls still posted a plus 7.2, which is still very impressive. But when Pippen played without Jordan, the rating dropped to minus 1.4, and that's the key difference right there. It shows Pippen was valuable, but the clear MVP and most impactful force was Michael Jordan. And with that, that's the breakdown, and I'll leave you with this final thought. Looking at Rich Paul's media takes overall, many see it as inconsistent and heavily criticized across the board. And from my perspective, the more he speaks on these topics, the more it exposes how polarizing and questionable his narratives can be. As always, appreciate you watching, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one.